All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Attorney Lounge. We got Josh Neuman with us from Pogust, Goodhead. Did I say that correctly?
You did. Nailed it, Brian. Thanks.
Good. I wanted to be sure. I got that one right. So Josh is a partner at Pogust Goodhead, litigator. We're going to get a little bit into his primary practice and what he does and talk about kind of life in big law firms. And before we get there, though, the little bit of a curveball that I'm going to throw Josh this time, which is not really much of a curveball, I don't think. But the brackets just came out. The NCAA tournament starts this week. It's one of my favorite weeks. So Josh, I guess the big question, who's going to win? Who's going to win the tournament?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me. It's my favorite time of year too. It always just seems like the chaos is just, it's insane. I love it. And just these teams and these players, it's just totally different from professional sports because you can see how much they care about their schools and how much they actually want to win. And you just lose that in professional sports settings, which is why I love it. But getting into the bracket themselves, I would say UConn again looks really good. I don't want to commit to that yet. I usually wait until like Wednesday night after the playing games to fully click accept on the bracket and lock everything in. But UConn just looks so good. They were so good last year when they won.
They're so good. And they just routed the field last year. I mean, it wasn't even close.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the way they look this year too, I agree with you. The only thing, the downfall, being a KU fan and being the number one seed in the tournament is like that curse, right? Now you're marked and the pressure is on you to sustain that. I think that absent just them, hitting a hot team that and kind of, getting tight and stuff like that, I just don't see anybody beating them.
Yeah, I think Stetson is probably not going to be a 16-1 upset this year for UConn, but it feels like the committee got a little crazy with some. They really wanted some quality first round matchups. Like the minute when I was watching the selection show, and they announced Wisconsin versus James Madison 12-5 matchup, and I was like, that's immediately James Madison 31 win team. They're absolutely beating Wisconsin. Like there's just no question in my mind. Matchups like that. And I'm, by the way, from family who most of my family went to Wisconsin. So hopefully they don't see my prediction on that. But there's just been a lot of really, really good games.
I think it's going to be a crazy year. There's a lot of parity. You got the NIL stuff. So you get some smaller schools that, maybe some players are transferring a lot more often, so my school, I'm a KU grad, so I'm a huge Jayhawk fan. So I'm pulling for them. I was a general counsel at Grand Canyon University for 10 years. They're also pulling for them. They got a 12-5 matchup against St. Mary's and which I like the matchup, but last night when the brackets came out, a lot of the prognosticators were sort of picking them to win. I'm like, hey, don't put any extra pressure on us. But that could be a fun one.
I like Grand Canyon too because, not to jinx them obviously, but then they get that next matchup. I think they'd be in Washington. In Washington.
They're in Spokane. Yeah.
Or Spokane, right. Yeah. So that's it feels like that's geographically a better match. If they can get past the first round, get past St. Mary's, who has, kind of home field there too.
Yeah. If they can get past St. Mary's, they got probably Alabama next.
Yeah.
But GCU's got a really good team. A kid named Tyon Grant Foster transferred from KU. An amazing story. Had a heart issue. Went to DePaul, then had a heart issue. Came back from that. I'm hopeful that they can win and tell the stories of some of these kids that I know really well. And but there's a million great stories. That's what's so great about the tournament. You get to know these kids and the teams. There will be a Cinderella every year. So
it's great. And then, the other side, I think we talked about this previously, but on the other side of that is my law school, Temple, had a very interesting weekend. I don't know if you saw that, but they played, they started playing Wednesday. They won Thursday. They won Friday, Saturday. They got all the way to the championship as a, 15-19 team. Almost being, they didn't almost beat UAB. They got killed by UAB, but they, in a 1 week span, they went from, hey, you're playing so poorly that you're being investigated for point shaving, to we almost made the NCAA tournament, and Adam Fisher, our head coach, has like the entire team buying in. So
Yep.
That was just watching that with some of my Temple buddies was insane.
Yeah, that would have been a really cool story. I love those old Temple teams with John Chaney,
Yeah,
back in the day. So yeah, it just from a nostalgia standpoint, it's always cool to see Temple do
yeah,
well. I was rooting for them, but they couldn't
yeah.
pull it out.
It was close, but no cigar.
So okay, so you kind of briefly mentioned there you went to Temple Law School, but back up just a little bit further and tell us kind of where you grew up and how you got interested in law school and becoming a lawyer. A lot of this is sort of I'm kind of asking everybody that's on the show kind of where you started and how at what point kind of in your life did law become an interest and did you navigate into potentially going to law school?
Yeah, so I grew up in Farmington Hills, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit. It's about 30 minutes outside of Detroit. Um, and I went to high school, elementary, middle, high school there. Ended up going to University of Michigan for undergraduate, the undergraduate program there. I studied American culture and international studies. So I kind of had no idea what I wanted to do, obviously. So I had a wide spectrum of,
Yep.
uh, of my degrees there, my dual degrees.
Hmm.
I did always know I wanted to go to law school. My father's an attorney in Michigan, and I grew up actually like working in his office. He owned
Okay.
growing up, he had his own practice, his own firm, a small shop with 5, 6 lawyers, and I would work in the mailroom and work at the front desk, help with any sort of client relations stuff. So that was like all through high school. I helped out his law practice.
Okay. Hmm.
In addition to some other jobs I had in the Farmington Hills area.
Hmm.
So I always knew I'd go to law school. I didn't quite know what I wanted to be as a lawyer as far as like, what were my interests. Did I want to do litigation, transactional work? My dad he does real estate litigation. So I knew kind of what it meant to be a litigator, but I didn't really understand the transactional component of being a lawyer. And I thought that even going into law school, I thought that really interested me. And I thought I was going to go into transactional work.
Hmm.
Uh, and then my final year of law school, I took a couple litigation courses and loved it. And so that's how I kind of like transitioned into the litigation path.
Okay. You're kind of opposite of me. I kind of thought I was going to go into litigation. Going through law school, it's like I didn't know really what I wanted to do. But when I did my summer associate year at Snell and Wilmer, I really gravitated towards the guys that were in the transactional group and the corporate group, and so it was kind of my first exposure to that type of practice,
Yeah.
and fell in love with it, and that's ultimately where I ended up. A little Farmington Hills story. A friend of mine moved there in the ninth grade. His name's Chris White. You probably don't know him. He's probably much older than you. But, we went up to Farmington Hills, and the one thing I remember about that trip is we
Yeah.
saw a Lamborghini pass us on the
Yeah.
on the highway, and Chris, my buddy, he swears that that was Lou Whitaker that we saw. I have
Yeah.
no idea.
It's fine. I
But
mean, there's probably not a lot of Lambos driving around Farmington Hills, Michigan.
yeah, so
Especially, that's cool.
that
That's
was my
cool.
one Farmington Hills story. I think we were just outside of Detroit or something like that when
Yeah.
we were coming in from the airport, and,
Yeah.
I was like, "Wow, Lou Whitaker." So
Yeah. Like growing up in Farmington Hills and I could probably count on, other than going to sporting events in Detroit, I could probably count on one hand the amount of times I went to downtown Detroit, which is really kind of sad if you think about it, having access to this like really cool historic city and not really taking advantage of it because Detroit had always gotten a bad rap, especially in the 90s when I was growing up. Um, and then, moving to Philadelphia now, I've lived in Philadelphia for the past, how long it's been, 10, 12 years. And
mhm,
just being able to have access to a city and everything that it has to offer, like food, culturally, just diversity, everything that, a great city like Philadelphia has. And
yep,
I look back, I'm kind of sad that I didn't have access to that as much, or just didn't think to have access to it as much when I was growing up in Michigan, because
mhm,
Detroit is very similar to Philadelphia in that way.
yeah.
So it's a great city. Farmville is a great place to grow up, but if I could go back in time and do it again, I think I would have tried to take advantage more of Detroit and what it has to offer and learning from that environment.
Yeah, I like being in a big city. We're in Phoenix,
Yeah.
which I always kind of say is like the biggest little city in the country because it's so new. Everybody here is from somewhere else, and everybody's very welcoming. And And so, it's kind of an interesting little place where, as big as it is, I don't know, 4 or 5 million people in the Phoenix metro area, you still know a lot of people. And so when I moved here, I didn't know anybody. But when you practice at, a big law firm, you kind of get immediate exposure to a lot of different people and groups and, associations and things like that. And so I quickly was able to kind of establish, a presence and a network here in a
Mhm.
new city. So, I kind of like that about, big cities too, is like there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of different things you can do, the culture, the diversity, sort of the different. So I grew up kind of in a small town
Yeah.
as well. And, coming into a bigger city, I really appreciate it a lot more now.
Yeah, Phoenix is really my grandma lived in Phoenix for a long time in the Scottsdale area, and every time I would visit or go there for work or wherever I was, whatever reason I was there for, I loved it. It's just, and
Yeah,
I know Maricopa County is huge, right? So it's like,
it's massive.
it's massive.
Oh
I
yeah.
think it's the biggest county in the country or one of them.
Yeah, in terms of land mass, like it's just sprawling.
Yeah,
It just extends out forever. Unlike like a place like Philadelphia or New York where everything's compressed.
right.
Here it just goes on forever, and you really see it when you're flying in because you're
Yeah,
just like the lights are going forever.
yeah, it's true.
So here I got an you went to Temple, right? Temple
Yeah,
University Law School. Here, I got an interesting story for you there too. This is
cool.
not to take over this podcast
No, no,
about
go
you,
for
but
it.
so when I first got interested in law school in the late '90s, this is probably like 90 when I graduated from college, 95. I graduated from college, so this would have been maybe 94.
Mhm.
We didn't really have the internet, nothing, but we had this thing called Prodigy. And I logged on to Prodigy and I found like a forum on there. And there was some attorney from Philadelphia who went to Temple University Law School. And I was interacting with him
Yeah,
and I was telling him I was interested in going to law school and stuff, and
mhm.
he was sort of telling me what he did. He was a tax lawyer in Philadelphia and was telling me he went to Temple University Law School and stuff. That was my first interaction, like online. It blew my mind that I could sit there and just have a conversation with somebody in real time, back and forth, like on my computer. I
Yeah.
don't know. This sort of a weird. That's my connection to Temple University School a lot.
It,
So
and, that's so it's great, especially now, the the modes of, communication we have, and it's just like, I'll even set like from my standpoint for work, we have Teams, email, Messenger, we have, whatever. At one point, I think we had more, like Zoom, all this other,
yeah,
like, ways to
yeah.
communicate. And then you go back to the '90s where how amazing it was to you to be able to communicate on Prodigy. If you could pick yourself up and put yourself here, you'd probably be mind blown, right? Like, it's
Oh,
crazy.
for sure. I mean, how far we've come, and it's just you take all of this for granted now. I mean, the fact that we're having a podcast and we're just, you just pull up your computer and click on
Yeah.
Zoom and you don't even think twice about it.
Right. Logged
Um,
on, click, give
yep,
the intro, we're here. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
yep. And so, I guess maybe using that a little bit as a lead into kind of the type of practice that you do today. I mean, that changes the way we practice today,
Right.
from what it used to be where, you'd write letters, put them in the mail, send stuff back and forth,
Yeah.
show up at the courthouse to file your complaints and all that sort of stuff. And so, tell me a little bit about, how you ended up at Pogust Goodhead and, kind of what your practice is like.
Yeah. So I wound up here. My first job out of law school, I guess I'll start there, was at a firm called Kilcoyne and Nesbitt, and we did primarily medical malpractice defense litigation. So I would have anywhere between an inventory of 100, 150 cases that I'd be working up with. As a junior associate, I'd be working up with a senior associate and a partner, and that was my first like dive into civil litigation, and I loved it. It's just a fantastic firm. I got to learn from one of the best partners in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. I feel like his name's Jim Kilcoyne. He'd been doing litigation, still doing litigation for many years, and I was able to learn from him. And the senior associate I primarily worked with was Jackie Dragus, and she as well was just like fantastic in litigation. So, in that job, I learned just the rules of civil procedure, how discovery works, everything from pre-complaint all the way up until trial is how I was trained over there. And then I worked on that that job for about 4 years before I was introduced to my current firm now, actually in an opioid class action case. So I had brought over a case to Kilcoyne and Nesbitt that we were working on. It was one of the only mass tort class action cases we had at the firm, and it was a class action case over the price premium increases due to the opioid epidemic. And
Mm,
so we had filed on behalf of a putative class um, in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. And from that, I met some of the partners at my current firm at Pogust Goodhead. They were great guys. I realized I wanted to do more of that complex mass tort litigation as opposed to doing medical malpractice defense.
mhm.
And so they offered me a position, and I've been here ever since.
Awesome. Yeah, one of the way like, kinda when you're describing what you did, I remember when I first started, one of the partners in our, product liability, division at, Snell, he kind of explained it as you learn the dance. He's like, when you're a young associate, when
Yeah,
you're figuring things out, he's like, you don't learn really how to practice in law school. You learn when you start and you learn the steps to the dance. And then once you learn the steps to the dance, you just repeat the dance over and
yeah,
over and over.
yeah.
I think it applies in litigation, applies in corporate practice. Is that, kind of resonate with you, that analogy?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it absolutely does. I'll tell you, I took the first, I mean, Kilcoyne and Nesbitt at the time, they offered me a job and I took it right away. I wasn't waiting around for other prospects. I wanted to just get to work and build, build my name, build my own civil litigation practice. And a lot of it is doing the dance, right? Like learning how it's done, especially in Pennsylvania. We have a lot of nuance in state court. We have a lot of nuanced rules that are very different from other jurisdictions that I've practiced in. And so you just need to do it over and over again until you learn the trade. And that's what I did at my first job and how I was able to, pivot over to my current position and just
Yeah.
continuously doing as much civil litigation as possible to learn the craft.
Yeah. So let me ask you this too. Like when you're
Mhm.
getting started out, you're working at a big firm. I look back on my career, I think about how I spent my time when I was a younger associate. My whole thing, like I tend to have a hard time saying no. And so partners would come to me and we were in the dot-com bubble. So we were just
Yeah.
getting tons of deal work all the time. So I was just picking up tons and tons of experience. The one thing I didn't do well at that time was business development. So and I think back on 'em, like, I should have carved out more time for myself to figure out how to develop my own book versus just working on other people's project. As I think about, practice now, I think, like, the holy grail to me in terms of having a very, fulfilling career working at a law firm is really develop your own book of business, and I would have started that. I would have carved out, more time. Maybe when you're young, you're learning the steps to the dance, you're learning your craft, but I would have carved 10% out up for to really try to figure out how to develop my own book. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. So in law school, I had never even thought about business development until my third year. I took a course with the actual Fox Business School at Temple.
Mm,
Um, and so it was like a some type of business development course. And I was actually placed as the in-house attorney on a small team of 6 business school students. So I would be advising them, during that process. And that was really my first introduction into like the business world and being an entrepreneur and working for yourself. And um, you know, that was from there I really realized that it kind of opened my eyes as far as what you can do as an attorney in business development itself, making
mhm,
connections with people. I think it's incredibly important, and I think law schools don't do a great job of teaching lawyers about that. I think law schools do a great job teaching lawyers about how to be judges,
mhm.
or appellate attorneys,
Yep.
or arguing in front of the Supreme Court, but they don't do a great job of showing trial attorneys what it's like to build a book of business, or what the business aspects of the law might be.
Mhm.
And from that experience and from that course at Temple to transitioning to my current role here at Pogust Goodhead and being a partner here, I realize how important it is to develop those connections and just both socially and professionally, right? So one of the things I do is I'm an arbitrator in Montgomery County. And so I
Mhm.
sit on an arbitration panel of 3 attorneys. And it's really just to help the courts filter through dockets on smaller cases. And it's good experience for me in the standpoint that I get to see, a, a type of litigation in front of me, and it's, we call them mini trials, right? Because
Mhm.
the mini trial essentially of a couple of hours. But it's also good because I see a lot of the court staff and the judges as I'm there, and it's a good way to professionally get my name out there, and for people to think of me and say, "Oh, Josh Newman does XYZ litigation. Let me reach out to him to get his thoughts on this." And it doesn't
Yeah.
always necessarily mean you're getting a case from it, but you're at least interacting with your colleagues and learning from that process. So I think it's really important for young lawyers to think about business development, as they're going through their careers. It's extremely important.
Yeah, and I think you can't develop those relationships soon enough. I think, you build that because I agree with you. Law school, you learn how to research, you learn how to write, you learn how to think critically through an issue. I did moot court, there's a lot of opportunities like that. So, to kind of develop your skills. But then when you get into practice, it's, completely different ball game. Like I say, you're learning really practical steps that they don't teach you in law school. And then nobody's really helping you in terms of a business development or sort of, I feel like, when you get in, it's like you got a lot of partners, you got a lot of work, and you're trying to keep up with the work that they have. And you're not really, you're getting so much thrown at you that's new, but you're not really taking a step back and looking at the 30,000 foot sort of big picture. I had one of my friends, a couple years ahead of me, he kind of pulled me aside. We were sitting there at night, it's
Right.
like, 10, 11 o'clock at night, and we're looking around, and he's like, "Hey, look, a lot of these partners, they're still here at the office, right? They got families at home. Like, think about is if this is what you want to do for the rest of your career." And the thing is, a lot of the attorneys that were not in the building were the ones that had a book of business.
Right.
And so I tend to think about, now if I had it to go back and do again, I'd be really trying to build that network as soon as I could. You can't connect exactly how those dots are gonna
Right.
flow, but somebody says, "Hey, Judge so and so said, I should reach out to you. I had a question or whatever. Josh, can you help me out?" So, I think it's just don't. My advice to young attorneys is don't focus exclusively on what's in front of you. Take a step back. Think about the big picture and think about building your network.
Right. And don't be afraid to take a risk with, with something, and for it to fail, because you learn from it either way. And
Mhm.
I've had, like, I feel like in my neighborhood, I'm kind of known as like the lawyer that people, come to and ask for advice and questions, regardless of what the practice law is. And I may not know the answer to every question. Obviously, I don't, but I always say I take it seriously. I say, look, let me see if I can find someone that will help you. So even if you can't
Yeah.
be that guy or that person to answer the question, at least you can help try to find the person who can. I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, being a connector and finding, even if you don't get business from it, when open doors for other people, that can sometimes come back tenfold.
Yep.
So being a connector to other people can really boost your career in a lot of ways too.
Yep.
Yeah, and one of the interesting pieces of advice too, one of the best business developers we had at Snell, he one of his pieces of advice earlier was don't go to the bar convention, and maybe it's different in litigation, but in corporate practice, he was like, "Go find the business associations. Like, the
Yep.
clients are not at the bar convention, don't go hang out with other lawyers. Meet people in the business community.
Yep.
You're looking to have connections with CEOs and CFOs or, young professionals, in your community. Like, those are the people that you're really ultimately trying to, generate business from."
I totally agree.
Yeah. And so in your practice too, like with mass tort litigation, like
Mhm.
maybe just explain a little bit kind of what that means and the type of work you work on, and then how do you develop a book in that area?
Yeah. So mass tort litigation, a lot of times it gets confused with class action litigation, which my firm, obviously, we handle both. But the difference really is mass tort litigation. It boils down to, if you have a group of folks, a group of people, a larger group of people who have all been injured by the same product, same medical device, or same um, pharmaceutical device, um, or a drug, or whatever product it is.
Mm.
they may have different types of injuries or, different things happen to them, but it's all kind of a mass action, a group action because they were all injured by the same mechanism of the defect in the product. That's
Mm.
typically what we look at, what we call a mass tort. Whereas with a class action, that's your standard. Everyone, like the Apple iPhone is a good example where everyone was slowed down. Everyone's iPhones were slowed down as a result of the defect in the
Oh, the
product. So
battery
everyone had
system.
the same injury and
Mm.
same recovery. It's a totally different world in mass tort. Um,
Mm.
and so we handle my firm handles all different types of products cases. Um, and usually the clients are spread across the entire country. So from every jurisdiction, we represent people everywhere. And because my firm is overseas, since a lot of the products that are sold in the U.S. are also sold in Europe or South America, we represent. And my office just opened, or my firm just opened an office in Australia. So down there, it's the same deal. These products are
Mm.
sold everywhere, and so we can represent clients everywhere. That's kind of like the vision of the firm.
Real quick, I want to recognize our sponsor, Array. Array handles all the details of litigation so that you can focus on winning your case. They take care of forensic collection, e-discovery, managed review, record retrieval, court reporting, legal staffing and recruiting, trial support, you name it. I'm the general counsel at Array, so I may be a little bit biased, but I was also a client before I started working there too. I've used them on various matters, and they've always delivered. If you're involved in a lawsuit, make Array your first call, and they'll help you get organized right from the beginning. You can reach out to me or visit trustarray.com. Now, back to the pod. Like, what's an example of some of those cases that I saw in your bio? You had like artificial tears and
Yeah, yeah.
UV
So
gel manicure. I don't like what. Tell me
yeah.
about some of those.
Yeah, so, the Esri one of them is the Esri Care Artificial Tears case, and that was a case about a product that was, manufactured in India and then, shipped to the United States. And unfortunately, the problem with that product is it included, an issue with the manufacturing plant in India where they weren't up to standards and it wasn't, safe there, and so the product was actually, um being contaminated with a very rare bacteria called Pseudomonas aeruginosa. And a novel strain of that made its way to the United States through the shipment that was then sold, across the country. So the FDA and CDC recognized it. They figured out that all these various strains that were popping up across the U.S. were connected back to this Adric artificial tears, and so they recalled the product, took it off the shelves. And so now, my firm, we represent um, a couple dozen clients or so who have all been injured from that product, that same product that was shipped to the U.S. A lot of their injuries are different. We have clients all the way, who have had to have their eyeballs removed because of the terrible bacteria.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's really, really serious injury. So it's that's like a typical case that I work on that I help lead at the firm.
Wow. Do you have to have I mean, number one, I don't have the stomach for some of that stuff. I like, some of these cases, I mean, like you say, having your eyeball removed or like serious injuries that people deal with. I mean, do you like, number one, do you have the stomach for that? Obviously you do. And number two, you threw out a really complicated sort of name there for whatever
Yeah.
was the thing that's in it. I mean, do you have a background in science that sort of helps you understand, at a deeper level, kind of what the issues are on some of these things?
I don't. My wife's a nurse practitioner. I try to bounce everything off her if I can. For me, I try to become an expert in every single one of my NASTOR cases, and I do that by speaking. We retain experts at the outset of a case. So in this case, we have an expert ophthalmologist, and I say, hey doc, tell me everything I need to know about this bacteria strain, about what's going on here. And
Yep.
so that's it's very hard. You have to become um, really well versed in medicine. But I will say in the mass tort complex, it's actually a little bit easier than it was when I was doing this, as a med mal defense lawyer, because in those cases you have to become expert in the actual medicine to protect the doctor who's being sued at the
Mm.
time, for whatever they're being sued over, So it's like if they did botched a surgery, whatever it is, you have to learn everything there is to know about that surgery.
Mm.
Whereas in the mass tort products liability world, you're just learning more about the injury itself and not like how to actually perform the medicine, which is a little bit easier.
Yeah. That's crazy. I mean, I think about again, like going back to law school, I guess I
Mhm.
could have learned some of that stuff if I did. I mean, I know a lot more about business now than I did, being a transactional lawyer. But I just can't imagine myself learning about, you know, like we talked about the steps to the dance, but then you got to
Yeah.
layer on top of it a bunch of science. And every single case, I assume you're probably learning something new
Yeah.
about some new product. What's wrong with it? I mean, so every single case is probably
Yeah.
a little bit different, I assume.
Yeah. I was, my firm had I was working on a case, over an IV iron product, that had a side effect and called hypophosphatemia. And so I had to become an expert essentially in this, electrolyte imbalance that I'd never heard of the term hypophosphatemia before before I'd started working on this case. And
Mhm.
that you work on it for 4 years, 3, 4 years, and you gain that institutional knowledge that a litigation requires. Um,
Yep.
and that, then you move on to the next thing, right? And you have to figure out what the next thing is. So it is difficult.
Mm.
And you gain a lot of surface level knowledge into certain aspects of it. But when you talk about a mass tort that you work on for multiple years, there is a institutional knowledge that's required into whatever the background of that litigation is.
Yeah. And as you're working through the steps of the case too, one of the things that's kind of interesting to me, how many of these cases actually make it to trial? Like what percentage of them? I mean, when I was in or working with, I was a GC of a couple of publicly traded companies, and you'd
Mhm.
get these class action securities lawsuits.
Mhm.
Kind of the name of the game there is survive motion to dismiss,
Mhm.
and then if you can win on summary judgment, like then it's sort of a negotiation between the insurance companies, for your D&O policy to try to, negotiate some sort of settlement
Yeah.
because, only 1/10 of 1% of those cases end up going to trial. Like, is that similar in terms of the world that you're in terms of like get through motion to dismiss, survive summary judgment, then try to negotiate some sort of settlement? And how many of these go to trial? Kind of what's your practice been like in terms of kind of the percent that goes to trial and how many you try to settle before that.
Yeah, very, very few, very, very few. I think I
Mm,
hear people toss around, 1% of cases go to trial. I think it's probably less than that.
mhm,
Especially, the mass tort world, we have what's called a bellwether process, which I'm sure you've heard before, which is essentially because let's say you have 1,000 cases, you can't work up and try a thousand cases. The court system and the lawyers would be totally overwhelmed. So you take, let's say, a handful, 10 of those 1,000 cases, and you work them up in a bellwether structure. So those are the ones that get scheduled for discovery, depositions, trial. And so that way the parties can really learn a valuation of those cases.
mhm,
I would say in my experience, even getting those bellwether cases to trial is pretty rare. Usually litigation will settle prior to the actual bellwether trial process. Not in every case. Though we have certain cases where the trials do go forward, but it's
mhm,
it's it's never a situation where you have to having to try all that all 1,000 cases. Um, it would just be too difficult. And so yeah, it's very similar to experience to what you had. I would say I think you said essentially 1/10
yeah.
of
About
cases.
1/10 of 1% of those class action securities lawsuits end up ever even going to trial. Yeah.
Yeah, it might be similar in our world. I bet you it's pretty close to that.
Yeah. Because I think by that point, the insurance company is trying to figure out, what the chances are. People are
Yeah,
trying to, so I guess I haven't asked you before, like
yeah.
any case, have you gone to trial? I guess. How many cases have you gone to trial with?
So I've never been a first chair on a trial, which is crazy.
Mhm,
That's the one thing I really haven't done in litigation. I've
mhm,
observed other trials that either my firm or my current firm or my past firm has had.
mhm,
I had more trials in my past firm because it was more one-off cases where you have one individual doctor that's being sued.
mhm.
Um, in my current firm, the vast majority of our cases when we bring them, especially in the mass tort world, they settle.
Yep.
So I've never been a first chair
Yep.
uh, on a trial. I'm looking forward to one day, hopefully doing that.
Yep.
And as much as I want to do that, in the end, it's really always about what's the best interest of the client.
Yep.
And we're very serious law firm. We take only very serious cases. And so a lot of the times we're getting offers on our cases, that will, give some relief to our clients.
Yeah, and you gotta balance. I mean, obviously, the clients kind of got to balance the cost, the time, the risk of going to trial, what a jury might do. You're always balancing those things. When we had a case back when I was with a company called IGO, we had a class action securities lawsuit. We ended up working with Wilson Sonsini, and it was one of those things where um, my first experience in that world, and we were trying to figure out who to represent us, and we had different firms kind of pitching us and stuff. And, one of the things that, some of the firms were like, we'll take this thing to trial and stuff like that. We ended up working with Wilson Sonsini, and I worked with somebody there. She was incredible. Her name's Nikki Locker. She's in their Palo Alto group. And she's like, if this thing goes to trial, she said, I'm not your attorney. Like, that's not what I do. But
Yeah.
here's the guy that would handle the case. He's fantastic. And so they actually had a specialist that handled trials. I mean, learning the steps to the dance, like we talked about, like I didn't have that big of an appreciation for that when I was in law school, what a specialty trial litigation is.
Yeah.
And just, I mean, that's a whole world in and to itself that's completely different than managing a case from beginning, to that point.
Right.
It takes a special skill set to actually conduct a trial. And yeah, it'd be I the only time I've been to court was when I got, my jury notice.
Mhm.
Nobody's gonna
Yeah.
hire me to go to trial, that's for sure.
Yeah, the really nice thing about doing this on the plaintiff side in the mass tort world is you get the whole gambit of experience. For when I get a case, when I get assigned as a partner or back before I became a partner, a senior associate to a case, you're you're doing that initial investigation from the start point from the gun all the way up until, I'm going to be the one sitting there at trial, whether it's
Mhm.
me and, another partner, or when I was an associate, or now it would be me as the partner at the trial. Um, you're able to do every aspect. So you get to learn a lot about yourself and what you like. And it also keeps you on your toes because you get to do a whole host of different jobs, which I
Yep,
enjoy. Maybe not for
yep,
everyone, but I do enjoy that.
yeah. Well, and I know, like, even at trials, like, they'll break up, the trial team. You'll have one person that's, maybe, uh, uh, doing cross for the expert.
Hmm.
And you might have another person that's doing, the cross for like the plaintiff, or whatever. So like even then, it's like you got to break it up. Somebody might do, whoever does the opening argument might be different than does the closing argument. Like all that sort of stuff is
Yeah.
sort of fascinating to me how that all works. Well, so in
Yeah.
your practice, that oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was gonna say, yeah, my firm, we do a really nice job. I mean, we are a huge global law firm. But our US offices, we work really well collaboratively. Like I know all the lawyers in our US office. I work with all of them. And we've had even recently we've had cases that have been trial ready, working up for trial. And so I'll join whatever mass tort team that is, to help briefing, even though I wasn't assigned to that litigation initially. I'll jump on as give a helping hand, and we work collaboratively in that nature. So you get a lot of experience that way too.
Yeah. And so an interesting thing to me about the type of practice that you have where you have like so many different plaintiffs, explain how you go through a process of working towards a settlement and how you actually accomplish a settlement when you've got, perhaps 1,000 plaintiffs that are trying to settle something. Like, how do you, the logistics of that must be a nightmare because it's not just your firm. There's probably other firms that are representing other plaintiffs. So how do you get to, how do you wrap up a case when you've got so many different parties and so much going on at the same time?
It is a nightmare is an understatement. It is really very difficult. My partner Mike Daly, who's the managing partner of our office, I think it's his terminology. He sees it as it's litigation part one and litigation part two. Litigation part one is doing the case. Litigation part two is you've settled it. Now what do you do with the money? Um,
Mhm.
Assigning it to each individual client, it's very difficult. There's a lot of nuances that come into play, especially from like a professional rules standard. So typically in a mass tort case, there are actual settlement administrators that our firms will bring on to handle, like a third party administrator to handle the entire settlement because of client, duties. So I have duty to client A, a duty to client B. If client A gets more money than client B could come back and say, oh, well, you weren't representing me adequately. my interests adequately. So to essentially avoid any issues in that process, we'll retain this a third party seller administrator to come in and independently evaluate every single case in our inventory.
Hmm.
And then they help essentially assign values, individual valuations to each case. And then from there, they help with every aspect from, where does the money go, which is called a QSF, a qualified settlement fund.
Mhm.
So the money that the defendant will pay in the case goes into that QSF that then gets distributed to every single client. Um, and you need, there's so many spreadsheets involved with making sure every client, no client is forgotten, that every single client and their injuries have been evaluated. And then just from a client outreach standpoint, making sure you have enough people to reach out. If you have 1,000 clients in your inventory, every single one of them might have questions. You need enough people on your team to speak with all of them, just the letters and text messages and emails and everything that goes into client communication. It's quite an ordeal and a difficult process, but it's worth it because in the end, you're really helping folks that have been injured, and that's why we do what we do.
Yeah. And so you kind of in that world, then I think the next question I was going to ask is,
Hmm.
if you're looking at it from the standpoint of a young attorney, someone in law school that's interested in this type of practice, like, talk about what are the pros and cons, I guess, of, pursuing a career if they want to be a Josh Newman and they want to work in this area. Like, what's sort of the good of it, and what's the difficult part of it?
Yeah, I would say let's start with the difficult. I always like to do the negative first, right? So
Mhm.
that's how I phrase it to clients to leave them on a happy note. But the difficulties, the negatives are it's a lot of work. It's a lot of time. Uh,
Mhm.
you know, Unfortunately, it is what it is. I've had to miss, family events and other things, in order to adequately represent my clients. Um, but, you know, there's a balancing act that obviously goes into it where you need to, make sure that you spend time with your family, that in the back of your mind, you can't burn out. You need to always have that balancing act between, your professional world and working hard versus taking, time for yourself. Because I've seen it before with colleagues where people will burn out, and
Mhm.
there absolutely is a mental health crisis in the attorney field. I believe that.
Yep.
And it's because there's a lot of pressure on us. So negative uh, I would say one of the stronger negatives being the amount of time it goes into. But the positive is it's extremely fulfilling. It's a wonderful career to really help people who otherwise cannot help themselves. That's the
Mhm.
way I think about it. And I knew I couldn't go into medicine because I'm scared of blood, scared of needles, scared of pretty much everything that makes someone queasy. So this is the other thing I can do to try and help make the world a better place.
Yep.
So that I would say the primary positive being you really are helping people who otherwise would just have no other recourse. That's when I think about what I do. When I'm laying my head down at night, I'm closing my eyes and going to sleep, and I think about like my career or anything else going on. I really do think about how the people that I represent would have no other way to hold some of these like multinational conglomerate corporations responsible for some of the injuries. Like I was explaining the Esri Care case, like these people didn't know why they developed pseudomonas. They didn't know why they had to be hospitalized. It takes
Yep.
lawyers to come in and help represent them, help investigate what's going on and you know find them justice in whatever means necessary. So that's why I would say is a big positive.
Yeah, I think it's important, when you're looking at your career, you're trying to do something. I mean, money is obviously going to drive, you know, a lot of your behavior. But you got to find something like I don't think you're going to really have a fulfilling career unless you find something that you're passionate about and you feel like you're doing something, almost larger than yourself. You're building something that you can be proud of. So when you're fighting for people that you feel like don't have a voice or that don't have the ability to help themselves, it kind of gives you that sort of personal satisfaction, the fulfillment that you're looking for, which I think, you know, for younger uh kids or attorneys that are looking at a career, just looking for the most amount of money not always the best approach. Look at what's going to fulfill you,
I totally agree. And just to kind of pivot off that, I mean, some of my favorite cases are pro bono cases where, I just had a pro bono case with a woman. It was in the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas, and she was actually she was a defendant in the case. She was being sued as a driver. An Uber driver had hit her car. She wasn't injured. Like my client, she had done nothing wrong, but she had been sued in that case, and unfortunately, she didn't have any car insurance. So she wasn't assigned an attorney like you typically would in an auto case. And so I got a message from the pro bono group I'm involved in that said, "Hey, can someone please represent this woman? She's extremely nice and needs help just navigating the process." And helping her out is just extremely fulfilling. It's really I don't make any money from that client. She didn't pay me anything. I didn't
Mhm.
expect to be paid anything. I sat next to her, went to court with her, and made sure that her rights were protected. And it's
Yep.
really important to do that work, especially as a young attorney. It's good.
Yep.
It's good learning experience too. But above all, it's a client who really appreciates it, who needs the help.
Yeah, and I think it helps with that burnout issue too. I mean, um, because when you're doing stuff like that, you know, you it sort of gives you that sense of purpose
Mhm.
that kind of why am I doing this and why am I putting in these long hours? And if you're just grinding away, looking to get your 2,000 hours a year, and that's your primary focus, and thinking about your bonus and everything like that, it's just not going to sustain you for the long term. You got to find those opportunities, I think, to really give back, help, and get passionate about something.
Totally
Uh,
agree.
yeah. One of the other things that we had talked about
Mhm.
um, was this work from home concept. And when you're a young
Yeah.
attorney, part of what you're doing is, when I started out, like the whole foundation of this podcast was the attorney lounge. We would go up to the attorney lounge and we'd sit and have conversations like this. And now I talked to a lot of my friends that work at big firms, and the young associates, they don't come to the office. They work virtually from all over the place, and they're not getting this sort of water cooler, attorney lounge type of conversation. What are your thoughts on that? Any advice for young associates that may be thinking about working from home versus going to the office?
Mhm. My advice would be, do your best to be in the office as much as possible. I think I completely agree. It's the best place to learn from the superiors that you're working with, from more seasoned attorneys. I don't think I would be where I am today, um, which is, I'm making partner at 32. I'm 33 now. I would not be here, but for the fact that I had those initial interactions with attorneys. Obviously, this is pre-COVID. There
Mhm.
was no such thing as attorney work from home or fully remote
Yeah.
positions. I was able to just walk into someone's office and ask them a question, bounce ideas off them. It's really important. It's just a way to connect with other attorneys. It's a way to learn and to think about case ideas and strategy. Um, and listen, I know it's 2024. I get like there should be a balance between what's work from home and work in the office, and how my firm currently is. We do 3 days mandatory in the office and then 2 days from home, and I think a lot of firms are like that.
Mhm.
But I would say if you're a younger associate, go to the office as much as you can. I know it can be burdensome, it can be a hassle, but you learn a lot more in the office. You stay motivated working in the office as opposed to just siloing yourself off in a dark room at home. It's important to have both.
Yeah, I think so too. I think there's just so much of so much education that you get just from being around people that have been doing this a long time, learning the steps to the dance, learning how to generate business. You know, I always use the example of like somebody pulled me aside. One of the partners pulled me aside in the attorney lounge at Snell, and they were like, "Hey, are you saving for your 401k?" I was like, I don't know. Like I'm young. I started practicing
Yeah.
at 25, and then they're like, "Well, okay." So he does the example. He's like, "Okay, here I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to give you $1 million today, or I'm going to give you $1 today, and I'll double it every day for 30 days. Which one do you want?" It's the power of compound
Right.
interest, and sort of like he's like, "Go down right now, log onto your computer, and max out your 401k. Once you do it, you'll never think about it again."
Right. Right.
And
It's good advice.
you're not gonna log on to a Zoom call and have somebody tell you something like that. those are you're sitting around having a beer and
Yeah.
you're just chatting about life. And I think you miss out on some of that stuff when everything is virtual. But balancing it out, I mean, I think, with kind of the burnout issue we talked about
Mhm.
too is important, and being able to work from home, having that flexibility, being able to spend more time with your family, your kids is important. I think it's just don't forget about the other side of it. Building those relationships face to face with your colleagues,
Yeah.
with your clients.
Yep. I totally agree.
Um, Uh, all right. Well, I think we covered pretty much all the stuff I was hoping to get to. Any final sort of words of advice for young associates, attorneys out there that are thinking about practicing in a big law firm like you or plaintiffs work, anything like that, anything that you got on your mind you want to advise them on?
Yeah, I would say one thing I tell some of the younger associates that work at our firm and younger associates I come across is, uh, it's so important to be detail oriented.
Mm,
You don't want to be known as the person who's going to make mistakes in briefs, or a final product is not a final product. I very early on in my career when I was still clerking, a more senior attorney uh, gave me some advice, and he said, "Act like a Supreme Court justice is reading everything you turn in,
mm,
because you don't want to turn in like let's say a partner asks you to draft a brief, and you draft the brief, you give it to the partner." Um, you want that to be the final product as if you were submitting it to that Supreme Court justice, because that just makes the partner's life easier. And then the next time around, they're going to come back to you and say, "Hey, Josh, we worked well together on this brief. Do you mind helping me out this next case?" I think that can be lost on a lot of attorneys, and you get a major leg up if you're known as the person who is like a hawk with details, which I feel like I am at this firm.
mm.
And it's just a really important way to develop your practice. So I strongly believe being detail oriented is really key.
Yeah, I think that's huge. When you're young and you don't really quite understand how the process works. You don't have that experience. So, finding your edge
Mhm.
to get you that seat at the table. You want to be involved in the best cases. You want to be involved on the best transactions. What is going to differentiate you to get you that seat at the table? Because that's where you're going to have the front row seat to that sort of education that you want to get. And so, being detail oriented, I mean, that's your role. That's what you can do. Embracing it and being the best at it. Another area I think that's huge right now is understanding technology, bridging technology and law.
Mhm.
You can, if you can understand, how to leverage technology to benefit your practice. There's a lot of older attorneys that understand the steps to the dance, understand the world and have that experience, but they don't quite understand how to leverage technology. So find that competitive edge. I think being detail oriented is a huge one that where you're reliable, you're trustworthy, the partner can put you on an assignment and they can have every confidence it's going to get done
Right.
correctly. Or they can assign you like, how do we leverage, this technology to help, give us an edge in this case? Those types of things I think are so, so important. I think it's great advice.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, from a partner level, being able to assign something to an associate and just clear it from your mind, know it's going to get done well on time that's such a monumental advantage, because then you can go focus on something else. And that's how you elevate. And that's how, as a partnership track itself, that's how you become a partner. Those details. It's granular, right? It's every little
Yep.
thing matters. It really does. And so making sure you do it right is key.
Yeah, I think so too. And then, those people keep coming back to you time and time again. That's what you want.
Right.
That and the other thing I always kind of talk about is people that can get things across the finish line. There's a lot
Yeah.
of problem spotters, having problem solvers, huge. And some people just can't get things done and they can't get it across the finish line. And so being known as somebody that can do that really sets yourself up for success. Because what you want is exposure. You want exposure to the best cases, the best transactions, the best partners, the best,
Right.
So you got to find that reason for them to put you there.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Josh Newman, Pogust Goodhead, thank you so much for being on the show. Some great advice here. Enjoyed getting to to learn a little bit and meet you and understand your background. So thanks for coming on the Attorney Lounge. Want to thank our sponsor Array, who makes this whole thing possible. If you're new to the program, please subscribe, hit the like button. YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Please tune in for future episodes. Josh, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks so much, Brian. Appreciate it.